When I reached the milestone of my 18th birthday, my parents made a life-altering decision that would drastically change the course of my life. They decided to sell our family home, an action that left me without a place to call my own. Their motivation behind this sudden move was their yearning to embark on an adventurous journey of travel, a dream they had been nurturing for quite some time. Little did I know that this decision would set off a chain of events that would leave me grappling with homelessness and emotional turmoil. Fast forward 5 years, and life took an unexpected turn when my mother reappeared in my life under the most distressing circumstances. She showed up at my doorstep, her eyes welling up with tears, heartbroken over the revelation that my father had been unfaithful. Instead of offering the comfort and understanding one would expect in such a situation, I found myself reacting with a mix of anger and bitterness. I couldn't help but laugh in her face, reaction fueled by years of pent-up resentment and hurt, before firmly shutting the door behind me. At the age of 23, I found myself in a precarious situation, homeless and estranged from my parents. This estrangement began almost 5 years ago when I turned 18. Reflecting on my childhood, it becomes painfully clear that my relationship with my parents was fraught with challenges from the very beginning. From a young age, I could sense that I was not truly wanted by them. I remember countless instances where I desperately sought their love and approval, trying various ways to earn their affection. However, over time, it became painfully evident that my efforts were in vain. Realizing the futility of trying to win their hearts, I chose to withdraw and focus on my own life instead. This significant shift in my behavior and outlook began to take root during my middle and high school years. By the time I reached high school, my interactions with my parents had dwindled to only the most necessary communications. I would reach out to them when I needed something specific, avoiding any unnecessary contact otherwise. It wasn't that I didn't desire a relationship with them, rather, their consistent actions made it painfully obvious that they didn't want to engage with me. This realization left me feeling guilty for even reaching out when I needed assistance, especially since I had no one else to rely on. My parents were my only family, yet they made it clear that they had no intention of supporting me beyond what was legally required. My father worked as a pediatrician, a profession that required him to be nurturing and caring towards children. My mother, on the other hand, was a science teacher at a middle school, a role that also demanded patience and dedication. Both professions highlighted their ability to connect with and care for other children, which made it all the more ironic and hurtful that they were so detached and indifferent towards their own child, me. By high school, I had accepted that trying to win their approval was pointless. Our lives were so separate that we barely interacted. My father would return home late at night, and even though my mother would come home around the same time, we would never engage in conversation. Instead, we would retreat to our respective rooms, creating an environment that felt more like living with strangers than with family. The minimal interactions we had were purely functional, and I understood that I needed to fend for myself. On my 18th birthday, my parents made it explicitly clear that their support had been solely because I was a minor. Now that I was legally an adult, they expected me to navigate life independently. They framed this as encouragement for my independence, but I knew the truth, they simply wanted me to stop depending on them. Their indifference to my independence or well-being was disheartening and left me feeling abandoned at a critical juncture in my life. I hadn't applied to any colleges immediately after turning 18 because I decided to take a gap year to build some financial stability. I recognized that I needed to secure money to sustain myself before even considering higher education. Shortly after turning 18, I began searching for jobs and soon secured a position at a local supermarket. The pay wasn't substantial, but the sense of earning my own money was a welcome change. Unfortunately, this sense of accomplishment was short-lived, as just a few weeks into my new job, my parents dropped another bombshell. They were selling the house, and I needed to find a new place to live. I was utterly bewildered by their announcement. When I confronted them about their decision to sell the house, they explained that they intended to quit their jobs and travel across the country using the proceeds from the sale. They claimed to have been saving for this journey their entire lives, and now that I had a job and was old enough to live independently, they no longer felt responsible for me. Their rationale placed me in an incredibly precarious situation. I had only just begun to earn money and had barely any savings to afford rent, even if I had roommates. The reality was that without a stable place to live, my plans for attending college the following year were in jeopardy. Desperate to avoid homelessness, I attempted to negotiate with my parents, pleading with them to postpone the sale of the house for a few months to give me time to find a new living arrangement. However, they remained unmoved and indifferent to my plight. They insisted that they had waited long enough and were no longer willing to delay their plans. My mother's exact words during our confrontation were particularly hurtful. "You are an adult now, and we no longer need to take responsibility for what you do. As for the house, it's our property, and we can do whatever we want with it. Where you live is not our concern anymore." These words still sting because they encapsulate the complete disregard my parents had for my situation. Our argument that day was the culmination of years of tension, resulting in an intense fight that severed our relationship completely. After that confrontation, I had no further contact with my parents, which wasn't entirely unexpected given the strained relationship we had. In my anger, I called them terrible people and wished ill upon them, disregarding the fact that they were my parents. Their abandonment had left me feeling betrayed and alone, deepening the wounds of an already fractured relationship. With no other options available, I found myself without a home and without support from extended family. My parents had distanced themselves from their own families, making it unlikely that any relatives would take me in. Additionally, most of my friends from school were away at college, and I didn't want to impose on them or their parents. Faced with homelessness and uncertainty, I took a leap of faith and reached out to a coworker at the supermarket where I worked. This coworker, who would later become my wife, was in charge of the makeup department, and we had developed a friendly rapport over time. We both shared similar struggles with our parents, which made her understanding and supportive when I needed help the most. She was 2 years older than me and, like me, had been unable to attend college due to her father's addiction and her mother's self-centeredness. When she turned 18, her father left home to live with his brother, and her mother declared that she could no longer support her. Determined to pursue her passion, she had been working tirelessly to save enough money to attend cosmetology school and become a professional makeup artist. When I reached out to her about my dire situation, she immediately offered me a place to stay. I am profoundly grateful for her generosity and support, as her willingness to help me in such a cold time of year, despite her own limited resources, speaks volumes about her character and the depth of her compassion. For the first few months living with her, I didn't have to pay rent as I focused on saving money. I contributed to groceries and other household expenses, and once I had enough saved, I began contributing to the rent as well. Over time, our friendship deepened, evolving into a relationship where we became inseparable. My initial plan was to work at the supermarket for about a year and a half, but after severing ties with my parents and realizing I had no other place to go, I threw myself into my job with renewed determination. My hard work paid off when I was promoted to floor supervisor, a position I earned through my dedication and sincerity as an employee. For the past year, life had been relatively stable. I earned a decent income, and my wife was successfully attending cosmetology school while working part-time at the store. We were happy and building a life together, finding solace in each other's company after enduring so much hardship. However, our peaceful existence was abruptly disrupted last week when my mother showed up at our doorstep without any prior notice. I was stunned, having had no contact with her for the past 5 years, and had no idea how she had tracked me down. When I opened the door, she embraced me tightly, catching me completely off guard. I had neglected to check through the peephole before answering, which left me momentarily disoriented and unprepared for such an emotional encounter. After regaining my composure, I asked her why she was there. She had already placed her bags in front of our apartment, clearly indicating her intention to stay. My mother explained that she had returned because my father had decided to leave her for a waitress working near his office. She shared the details of their travels and how their relationship had deteriorated over time. According to her, they had spent the first year and a half traveling across the country before settling down in California. However, a month prior, my father had confessed to having an affair with a waitress, prompting my mother to return home in search of a divorce. With limited time before retirement and the need to save money for divorce proceedings, she had chosen to move in with me without consulting me first, leaving me to face the same harsh reality my parents had imposed on me years ago. Facing the same harsh reality that my parents had imposed on me, I mirrored my mother's previous sentiments back to her. I told her that since she needed my help, she was no longer considered family and that I would not take responsibility for her. I reiterated that it was my house now, and I could do as I pleased with it. With a smirk, I shut the door, laughing as I did so, perhaps the most satisfying moment of my life. However, my wife felt that I had gone too far. She believed that I should give my mother another chance, noting that my mother hadn't been actively fighting with us. She felt I was too harsh and that I should at least consider her request more thoughtfully. My wife's perspective likely stems from her own experiences of loss, having lost her parents in recent years, which influences her empathy towards my situation. In response to my wife's concerns, I clarified that we hadn't been arguing about the incident. While my wife was somewhat unsettled by my reaction, she understood that this was a personal issue between me and my mother. She recognized that it wasn't her place to interfere, but the tension was putting a strain on our relationship. To address this, I decided to open up to her about my childhood and the ongoing mistreatment by my parents. I explained how I had always felt like an outcast in my own home and how their actions had pushed me to the point where I felt no remorse for rejecting my mother when she needed help. My wife listened and empathized, understanding that my decision was shaped by years of neglect and emotional abuse from my parents. Despite our conversation, my mother continued to create chaos in my life. She resorted to harassment through social media, attempting to manipulate the situation in hopes of persuading me to let her stay with me. Instead of taking a mature approach, she chose to publicly accuse me and my father of cruelty, claiming that she regretted investing time in our family and labeling me as abandoning her in her time of need. She even created a fake social media profile, tagging me, my wife, and our friends and family in her posts. This was particularly unsettling because she seemed to have access to personal information that was not publicly available. My wife and I have private social media accounts, making it unclear how my mother obtained such details. Her actions were invasive and unsettling, leading many of our acquaintances to report an attempt to take down her fraudulent account. However, knowing her determination, we anticipated that she would simply create another one if necessary. I was reluctant to involve the police due to the hassle, effort, and financial burden it would impose. Both my wife and I were busy with our lives, and dealing with legal matters seemed impractical unless absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, my mother's harassment persisted for 2 weeks, escalating to the point where she began showing up at my workplace. She would arrive around noon and linger for an hour and a half, staring at me with obvious anger. Despite her persistent attempts to intimidate me, I chose to ignore her presence, believing that maintaining my composure was the best way to handle the situation. Then, unexpectedly, one day after not appearing at the store, I found her waiting by my car as I was leaving work. Her demeanor had shifted from anger to visible distress. She didn't seem angry anymore but rather upset and vulnerable. I felt a pang of empathy for her, recognizing that her behavior was a manifestation of her own pain and struggles. I invited her to sit in my car to calm down and discuss the situation, which led to an emotional breakthrough. She confessed that ever since their move to California, my father had been acting strangely, and upon discovering his affair, she was devastated. Her return was motivated by her inability to endure the constant reminders of his betrayal, and she had no financial means to support herself during the divorce process. Listening to her story, I felt a mix of disappointment and sympathy. Despite her desperate situation, I made it clear that while I could offer her some financial assistance, I could not allow her to stay in my home. Given everything she had done to me over the years, I couldn't trust her to respect my boundaries. Her reaction was one of intense anger. She rejected my offer of help and abruptly left, slamming the car door shut with force that emphasized her frustration and hurt. Since that encounter, my mother ceased all attempts to contact me. It has been nearly a month, and I haven't heard from her, leading me to believe that she has finally accepted my rejection and moved on. However, I remained curious about how she had accessed my personal information. It turned out that she had exploited an old Facebook account of mine, which I hadn't used for years due to losing access. My past habit of tagging friends in photos and not censoring personal details inadvertently provided her with the means to locate me. This revelation explained how she had managed to gather enough information to harass me effectively. As time passed, my mother's attempts to disrupt my life dwindled, indicating that she realized the futility of her actions. I appreciated that she had likely ceased her harassment, but I still hoped she was doing well despite our strained relationship. A few of her friends reached out to inform me that after being rebuffed by me, my mother had sought help from them as well, only to be ignored due to her long-standing pattern of neglecting their friendship when she was in need. A significant development occurred almost a year after our last conversation. To my astonishment, I learned from family members that my parents had reconciled and were back together. This news was shocking given the deep hurt my mother had experienced due to my father's betrayal. Upon hearing this, I decided to seek more information by talking to some of my aunts, despite not being particularly close to them. They revealed that shortly after my mother returned, she had given my father an ultimatum, either file for divorce or she would do it herself, vowing not to hold back in the process. My father had, in a twist of irony, attempted to reconcile with the waitress, only to find out she was unfaithful herself. Realizing his mistake, he ended the affair, paving the way for my parents to reunite. Learning that my parents had mended their relationship brought me a sense of relief. It seemed that their reunion was the best outcome for both of them, sparing each other the potential trauma of ending their marriage and moving on separately. My wife and I found humor in the situation, acknowledging that my parents had become somewhat of a family joke due to their tumultuous relationship. Their reconciliation, though unexpected, appeared to have brought some closure to their fraught past, and I felt content knowing that they had found a way to stick together despite their previous conflicts. In conclusion, the journey over the past several years has been tumultuous and filled with emotional upheaval. From being abandoned by my parents at 18 to finding solace and love with my wife, and dealing with my mother's desperate attempts to reconnect. Every step has been a testament to resilience and the complexities of familial relationships. While my parents' eventual reconciliation brought a sense of closure, the scars of the past remain, serving as a reminder of the challenges I overcame to build a stable and happy life for myself. Through it all, I've learned the importance of self-reliance, the value of genuine relationships, and the strength that comes from overcoming adversity.